Can you unravel the world's greatest mysteries?
Can you explain the unexplained and find the pieces to the most puzzling cases?
Or have mermaids taken over your local swimming pool and you want to know the best ways to get rid of them?
Mermaids don't exist, Tiernan.
Oh, don't they?
Are you a Mythbuster?
Or a myth truster? I'm Tiernan.
And I'm Athena.
Welcome to Bust or Trust,
A kids' mystery podcast.
And we are the Busters or Trusters. We will look into some very strange stories from around the world. No mystery is too big for us. Monsters, ghosts, and all types of the unexplained. Like, why are cookies called cookies when you bake them, not cook them?
Yeah, you're right. They should be called bakies. I'm going to start the petition immediately.
And I will be the first to sign it.
We dive into all the evidence we can find and present all the facts, figures and testimonies. Then it's up to you, our chief detectives. You'll work out what it all means and make up your own mind. Is our case airy-fairy or quite contrary? Are you a Mythbuster like me? Because things aren't always what they seem.
Or are you a myth truster like me? Because truth is stranger than fiction.
Only if you read really boring books.
Well, I read great books, actually. We'll tell you at the end of the show just how to get in touch, and you can let us know if you're on Team Buster or the very best one, Team Truster. We'll also hear from you, our chief detectives, and your thoughts on the previous cases, so stay tuned.
But until then, make sure you take notes, pay attention to all the information, and start putting together your case.
The case.
Athena, are you ready for this week's case, Athena? Hey, Athena.
What?
It's time for this week's case.
Already? Oh, sorry, I had no idea.
Are you feeling okay?
I'm fine. I was just away with the fairies.
Well, you are very welcome to Team Truster. I had no idea you'd already made your mind up on this week's case.
No way! What are you talking about? Being away with the fairies is a phrase that means a bit zoned out because I'm tired. It does not mean that I believe in fairies.
Oh no! Phew, saved that fairy just in time.
What? How did you save a fairy exactly?
Haven't you read Peter Pan? Whenever someone says they don't believe in fairies, the fairies get sick. You need to clap your hands to make them better. Hopefully our chief detectives will hear the evidence and decide for themselves if fairies exist or not, rather than just carelessly making them ill by saying such horrible things.
I wasn't making a fairy ill, especially as you can't make something ill if it doesn't exist.
How dare you! Now you'd better have some good fairy facts to make up for being so mean to the little guys.
I do indeed. Fairies, or as they are also known, the Fae, the fair folk, hidden people or brownies, are mythical creatures that are said to be very little, very beautiful and have magical powers. I'm sure many of our chief detectives will have heard of fairies before because of how often they feature in children's books. In fact, they are such a common feature in stories, that's why we know those stories as fairy tales. The most famous fairies that you might have heard of are Tinkerbell in Peter Pan, the fairy godmother in Cinderella, or Titania, the queen of the fairies, in Shakespeare's A Midsummer Night's Dream. People all across the world have and still do believe that fairies actually exist. For many centuries, there has been fairy folklore across Europe, particularly in Ireland, Scotland, Wales, and Cornwall, which is in the southwest of England. The first recorded mention of fairies was by the historian Gervase of Tilbury in England in the 13th century. He called them portunes and said they were no bigger than a finger and helped farmers during the day. However, at night they would become mischievous and lead riders' horses into swamps, which doesn't sound very nice at all. For a long time afterwards, they were thought of as tricksters, but in modern-day tales, as we now know them, fairies are often described as friendly, helpful creatures.
See? Even if you start out as a meanie, you can still change and become nice. Hey, Athena.
I'm not mean to fairies.
Well, that's for our chief detectives to decide.
No, they just have to decide if they think fairies exist or not. So can we please have the evidence already?
Of course. Let me use my magic wand to make our first piece of evidence appear.
First piece of evidence.
The first piece of evidence is first-hand sightings or experiences people have had of fairies. Marjorie Johnson from the Fairy Investigation Society collected statements from people who said they'd met the little creatures for her book, Seeing Fairies. These were all between the 1950s all the way to the 1990s and include the author's own experiences too. Many of the people she spoke to described seeing a fairy as uplifting or making them feel faint, or as one says, fairy-struck. Dorothy Tompkins, for example, saw a flying creature in her garden and is quoted as saying,
"This is not a butterfly or anything else. It is a fairy. I am absolutely sure, and nothing and nobody must ever make me doubt it."
Another fairy spotter, Cynthia Montefiore, spoke to Marjorie in 1977, who said she was with her mum in their family garden in Somerset when they both saw a fairy hovering in a rosebush, leaving them feeling astonished. These are just two of over 400 fairy believers in Johnson's book.
Okay, but I'm pretty certain that someone who is part of a fairy investigation society is already going to believe in fairies. So I can't say I'm sure that Marjorie Johnson would have asked the people she spoke to any serious questions about what they actually saw. I have mentioned this before. It is called confirmation bias. It means when you search for a meaning that confirms what you already believe in. These witnesses could have seen anything, a moth caught by the moonlight, a reflection, who knows? Sadly, with no physical evidence, just anecdotes, that doesn't really give us any proof.
OK, I know witness accounts can be tricky, especially if the person they're speaking to is someone who's a fairy expert. But it's not just Marjorie Johnson's book. Dr. Simon Young and Dr. Kerry Holbrook interviewed 1,602 people in Britain and Ireland for their book about fairies. And 44% of them thought they'd seen magical little people. They've appeared to women more than men, and the sightings often only last a few seconds. There are accounts all over the world from people who say they've seen little magical folk. Researcher into folklore, Dr. Robin Gwyndaf, spoke to a Welsh woman who is certain that she had met a fairy and told him that now knowing fairies exist gave her joy in life. In Newfoundland, Canada, there is a strong tradition of stories about fairies. One local, Mary Flynn, insists she saw them many times, saying that on one occasion,
"When I came down the way, I saw a red bandana and it blew across the road. When I looked to see where it went, I saw two little fairies by a tree with bright red windbreakers and little peaked caps."
Those are great stories, but again, there is no proof. Telling tales can be a way that we, as humans, communicate and make sense of what has happened to us. We might not be able to work out what we've seen, and so we tell ourselves something that we want it to be.
which means all these accounts could also be true. But if these witnesses won't persuade you to be nicer about fairies, then what about some actual photos?
Second piece of evidence.
The second piece of evidence proving fairies exist is actual photos of fairies. Now, I'm not going to fall into a trap here, Athena. I know the Cottingley fairy photos weren't real.
That's not fair, jumping ahead and doing my bit for me. Can you at least explain to the chief detectives what they were?
Of course. These were 5 photos taken by 2 cousins, Elsie Wright and Frances Griffiths, in 1917, that appear to show the girls posing with tiny winged people. They are brilliant and magical images, and because at that time photo forgery was difficult to do, many people believed them to be real, including the author of the famous Sherlock Holmes detective books, Arthur Conan Doyle, who was convinced that these pictures would persuade people that other mythical creatures and strange things actually existed too. They were called the Cottingley Fairies because the 2 girls were from Cottingley, a village in the north of England.
But as you've already said, the girls admitted many years later that the pictures were faked using cardboard cutouts, and they got help from Elsie's father, who was a keen amateur photographer. So, tell me, Tiernan, how is this evidence of fairies if we know the Cottingley photos aren't real?
Well, those photos weren't, but in 2014, a man called John Hyatt took what are now known as the Rossendale fairy photos. John is a professor in art and innovation at Manchester University. He captured amazing pictures of what looked like many minuscule winged fairies, though it's hard to see the detail of them due to the lighting. Hyatt said, "I was just taking sunset through the trees, and when I enlarged the photographs later in the studio, I saw these figures." He insisted the photos are not doctored apart from increasing the size of a detailed section of a larger photograph, and says the photos add some magic into people's lives. Hyatt received thousands of letters from people all over the world about them.
I'm sorry to disappoint you, Tiernan. I really am. But entomologists, who are people who study insects, said that they are definitely midges, which are small flies, not fairies. Male midges will dance with their legs dangling in the air when looking for a mate, and so in this shot, it looks like a little winged creature with 2 legs. Also, I think anyone who is a professor in art and innovation almost certainly must have had an inkling of how to take a picture that looked a bit magical.
Some people are still convinced they aren't midges, though. And here's my question for you, Athena. Do insects wear shoes?
Third piece of evidence.
The third piece of evidence is the fairy shoe of Beara Peninsula. This is a teeny tiny shoe that was found in the southwest of Ireland in 1835 by a farmer taking a shortcut across a sheep track. It is just 3 inches in size, so no bigger than an orange, and in the design of a shoe that was popular with men in the 1800s. It seems unlikely for a doll's shoe to appear on a random sheep track, and when the farmer passed it on, fearing it was a curse, it was studied at Harvard University in America. The researchers there said the stitching was too small to have been done by human hand, and it had signs that it had been worn.
That is good evidence, and an adorable shoe. I wonder if they do it in my size. Now, this is still a mystery, but just because it was unlikely that a shoe from a doll could end up on a sheep track, it doesn't mean that it didn't. It could have been dropped and moved there by the weather or an animal. But I am prepared to say that it's true that no one can explain it. Yet.
Isn't it funny how now fairies are seen as uplifting, beautiful creatures, but they used to be right tiny terrors?
I know. If they hadn't had a change of reputation, it could have really ruined some classic stories.
I don't like sweeping this floor, and I don't like my ugly stepsisters and evil stepmother. I just wish I could go to the ball.
Hello, Vaz.
Who are you?
I'm your fairy godmothers. What's your name?
Fairy godmother? I'm Cinderella.
Yeah, now I knows your name, I can steals it.
Steal it? I thought you might be here to help me.
Give me things, or I'll take your name and gives it to slimy creatures who fight in bogs, and you'll have no name, and everyone will just point and call you horrid names.
Give you things? But I have nothing. I'm just a poor girl made to work for my evil stepmother and stepsisters while they go...
Yeah. Look, I want sandwich, or I'll take your name and I'll make it rain on your face.
OK, I will. What kind of sandwich?
Cheese and pickle, with extra pickles, or everybody be called Cinderella, except you.
Here you go. I also put crisps on the side.
Thanks. You's not too bad for a horrid girl. Maybe I will help ya.
Oh, thank you. I need a beautiful dress.
Yeah, okays.
This dress is amazing. Diamonds, sparkles, and the softest silk. I look beautiful.
All right, big head. Modest much. You look okay. A bit.
And now I must go to the ball.
Oh my gosh, demanding, innit? All right, this is a good sandwich. So, your wish is granted, I suppose.
Thank you so... Where am I? This isn't the Prince's Palace. Ow! My dress is covered in mud. I said the ball. You fairies are so bloomin' horrid.
You know, I actually think the story of Cinderella is better with a mean fairy.
Wait till you hear the version of Peter Pan, where all Tinkerbell does is yell silly words, fly into people's hair, and take all of the biscuits.
Sounds brilliant. And what's also brilliant is our chief detectives. I think it's time for them to make up their minds and decide, do fairies exist or not?
Let's recap all the evidence.
Evidence recap.
Our first piece of evidence is the many witness accounts from people who say they've encountered fairies. They say the experience is magical and uplifting.
But a witness account isn't hard evidence, and it could be that they've just seen what they wanted to see.
The second piece of evidence is the Rossendale photos, pictures taken by a professor of many fairies dancing in the air at sunset.
But insect experts have already said these pictures are almost certainly of male midges who dangle their legs to find a mate.
The last piece of evidence is the fairy shoe of Beara Peninsula, a really weeny tiny shoe that was found on a sheep track in Ireland in 1835. Researchers say the stitching was too small to be done by a human hand.
While this is still a mystery, it could well be a doll's shoe that had travelled there by strong weather or had been picked up by a bird in its beak and dropped.
So now we're handing it over to you, Chief Detectives.
What do you think? Are you a fairies mythbuster?
Or a fairies myth truster? We want to hear from you and what you think, and most importantly, which side you're on. Say it with me. I believe in Team Truster. I believe in Team Truster.
I'm not clapping for that. This is definitely a Team Buster win. Send us your voice notes with an explanation of why you're a myth truster or a myth buster when it comes to whether fairies are real.
All you have to do is ask your grown-ups to help you email us your voice notes or thoughts to hello@bustortrust.com or drop us a line on the Spotify Q&A.
Tell us your name, age, what you think all the evidence means, and please make sure your grown-ups give us permission to use your voice notes or emails in our next episode. If you send us a review on Apple or feedback on Spotify, we sadly can't use your name.
But we love receiving all those messages from you, and here are some thoughts from you lot, our chief detectives, on our previous cases. We have had some brilliant feedback on Spotify from Jinx about the Voynich manuscript, who says, I still don't get if it's a hoax or not or something, so I'm not on just one side. Personally, I think the manuscript is a tricky mystery to tackle for anyone, so it's hard to tell. # team both and neither.
Well, I think since Jinx is on both sides, that means Jinx is on my side. Yes, I'm taking that as a win.
And on my side, Athena, sharing is caring, remember? Sharing is caring. We love to hear what you think, so please do rate and review us on Apple Podcasts and Spotify, and drop us a line on the Spotify Q&A too. It helps more detectives find, bust or trust. We'll even read out some of your reviews on our show.
Thanks for listening. We'll see you next time for more Bust or Trust.
Don't worry, Athena. I've left the fairies some offerings so they won't play a trick on you for being mean about them.
I wasn't being mean about non-existent fairies. Stop it, Tiernan. Hang on. Offerings? Where's my lunch?
I left it outside on the doorstep. You won't get any bad luck now.
What? I've already got bad luck having to do this show with you. Oh, is it still wrapped up? Can I go and get it?
I wasn't sure they could undo the wrapping with their teeny tiny hands, so no.